episode of Ask Me Anything. This is part of a Raising Our Resilience parent community. We want to make sure that you folks have the opportunity to have access to me at least about once a month on the topics that that have been rolling in as we ask parents, what is the hardest thing, like the most challenging thing that if you were able to get to the other side of would make the biggest difference in your parenting life right now? And always we're just so moved by the questions and topics. And I want to invite you to consider that even if someone asks a question or brings up a topic that's different from what you would have asked, that perhaps there's something for you in their question as well. So let's get us rolling. The first person that really stood out to us is Mel Finlitter. And she has a 4 and 7-year-old, an almost 7-year-old. And she says the hardest thing is having to keep him home from school since Christmas. I'm guessing from COVID, Omicron wave, et cetera. And they have some beautiful connection moments, but also so much fighting. So just really looking at like managing sibling conflicts, and that she'd also like to be able to manage her own triggers around this better. So Mel, first of all, how good of you to recognize that it's not just that they're driving you nuts or something, that you have your own triggers. That point of self-awareness is going to help all parents at all times when a big emotion comes up when you're in a situation with your children. So first of all, with conflicts, there's so much that can happen between siblings that is really hard to be around and can be triggering. For example, if it gets physical, if it gets loud, if it feels like it's getting dangerous in any way. But in particular, we tend to kind of feel protective of one child or the other, or can feel guilty about that. And then another thing that can come up, of course, is just being around conflict in general. I don't know about how about any of you who are listening, but I tended to be pretty conflict averse because of the way that I saw conflict, not be resolved and lead to a lot of bad feelings when I was growing up. It's just sort of like, oh no, this is here, what's going to happen, right? And other things that come up around conflict. So first of all, one thing that can help neutralize a trigger is understanding where it's coming from. Children will naturally, when they spend a lot of time together, find things to fight about. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing something wrong or that they don't love or like each other. Oftentimes it's just from the situational, like the preconditions of being stuck together at home. So if that's one thing that comes up for you, maybe a story around, oh no, like I'm doing something wrong, or now they don't like each other, it can be helpful to just remind yourself, okay, this is actually normal, like siblings fight, and especially when they're stuck together for so long. The next thing is to really think about empowerment, and that can also give you a role to play, even if you're triggered, even if and when, and especially if you're triggered, you have a role to play in how you're going to support them through that conflict. So one thing that we emphasize a lot in the immersion and in Raising Our Resilience with my other private clients as well is like equipping kids with problem-solving tools. And so I would be curious, Mel, to hear like what kinds of problem-solving tools do you think the kids already have and can and know how to use? And then maybe where are some gaps, right? So with 4-year-olds in particular, recognizing when you need to leave a conflict is a very new skill. And also doing something about to calm yourself down and soothe yourself when you're in a conflict is another thing that 4-year-olds need a lot of support with. And then the third thing for both of them another skill or tool would be around, getting used to this idea that when there is a conflict, there's an important back and forth conversation style that needs to happen where you take turns speaking and take turns listening. And you can build that in. So Mel, my hot tip for you would be that if you can build in some games where there's a bit more of that call and response, or like passing something around the dinner table that in each of you takes a turn kind of using a talking object of like sharing one thing that you liked about the birthday party you just went to, or doing a game where like, let's see how many colors we can name, like blue, red, green, just taking turns listening and speaking. And if you can get them an object that they will then possibly use to solve their problems, I've set up peace corners with a peace rose that's very Montessori style, or like a piece, like one of those stones that says peace on it, but a hard object, I don't always recommend, just in case there was a lot of anger. But something that they can pass back and forth and practice talking and listening. That can be really helpful. And then my last piece, so that's my hot tip. So if you're not going to do anything else, I'll try that one, is to really embrace the role of mediator. I have a client who's been really having to wrap his head around that I am the one who's going to probably need to mitigate the conflict and, play that role of hearing each child out and making a call about whether they should try to work it out now, or if they should kind of take to their corners and cool off and then try again later. Whether there has been any wrongdoing that needs to be remedied or repaired or even, forgiven and apologized for. I would say try with both arms to just kind of wrap around that and saying my child gets to learn this from me, and I get to create the most healthy version of how we solve conflicts that I can come up with, or with the support of a community or a mentor, that my child then gets to learn that from me. Even kind of the shift I'm kind of, guiding you towards here is shifting from, oh no, I have to deal with this, to, ooh, I get to really support my kids and having a healthy model of solving conflicts. And maybe I'll even get to learn some things along the way. So that's the invitation, Mel. I know it can be a bit of a leap, but what I found is that, when I was with 24, 36, and 48 children, I sure had to embrace that role. If all of us were going to survive each day, because a lot of the kids get enmeshed and, really act like siblings, and they're with each other every day in a similar way. And conflict resolution was top 3 skills I needed to be able to help those children be resilient and get that healthy model of how to navigate conflict. Mel, always good to hear from folks what they got out of that piece, and anybody else who's here. I know Lucia is here from Scotland. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Excellent. And I have your question queued up as well. So I'll have you in mind, Lucia, especially since you came in person live to the training. Good to have you. And maybe let everybody know the ages of the kids under your care, because then they can get a chance to get to know you, since this is a little community we got here. And as well as giving me some context, because even though I know you were looking at middle school age, just, do you have any of your own children, and what ages would they be, or in what capacity are you working with these sort of tweens and early teenagers? So let us know that, Lucia. And in the meantime, I'll go on to Steph Chaudhry Green and Steph, Atia, and Adriana's question or topic. So they said, how do I create an environment of listening and respect with my family? And I love this one to follow Mel's question, because you probably heard some things in there, right? So first of all, just establishing that in conversational patterns, there is an actual taking turns rhythm. There's a social norm around that children need to learn, because oftentimes they speak, or they speak then think. It's not even a conscious process. So even just learning the conversational rhythms will take you really far. I like playing games too, where they really need to pay attention to another person's cues, like charades, like Red Rover, those kinds of the mirroring one, where both of you, like Rachel Beth Goodman, who's a somatic therapist and does amazing work with the body and trauma. Look her up if you haven't met her before, especially for the elderly. Anyway, Rachel Beth Goodman did this mirroring exercise for us in our recent retreat, 3-day retreat called Emotional Mastery Weekend. And she just was move and follow my movements and see what that's like, and then take turns playing the mirroring game. And that can be really, a way to kind of help build some of the foundational skills that are required to be able to have respectful communication. The other thing is to really establish what your norms are. In terms of your rules and expectations. So, because the word respect means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And we use it as a catch-all for when we are uncomfortable or disagree with the way that communication is happening in the household. But if we're not instructive and descriptive and make distinctions for the kids, it kind of becomes more of a power struggle or a power play, because all they know is that you hold the keys to what's respectful or disrespectful, and you are the one who is going to be the judge and the jury, around whether they're being respectful or not. So getting really clear on like, what does respectful language mean, right? How do we show and demonstrate, right? And give respect to others, and how do we also earn it? So my invitation for Steph, Atia, and Adriana would be to really think about like, what do you mean when you say respectful language? And I know that for Adriana, for example, she has an 8.5, a 6, and a 3, 3 3/4, and a 5 weeks, different ages of kids. And her version is like, how do I get them to listen and cooperate? So a couple of ways you can establish cooperation would be, and like what that looks like, right? That's kind of our like key piece here, would be to model it as much as possible. So here's a good example. Oftentimes kids will come in and like, they'll either ignore or they'll interrupt you, or they'll do the opposite of what you ask. Well, sometimes it's because that's the mood they're in, and no matter what you do, that's just what's going to happen. But I have seen this idea of getting into the child's world makes such a difference, because when you take the time to get into their little egocentric bubble, which all the ages of kids, by the way, that Adriana has, are all pretty egocentric still. Maybe your 8.5-year-old is starting to have more of that probably has some of that true empathy of like taking perspective. Most of them are in their own world, and if you're not in there with them, then of course they're not going to listen to you or pay attention to you. In fact, you can sometimes even feel invisible, and that's why you have to get big and loud and maybe drop punishments or dangle rewards to get their attention. Well, let's do it a different way. Let's try getting into their world. So that means dropping down to their level of whatever they're doing, like being more shoulder to shoulder than nose to nose, and looking at what they're looking at and giving it attention, maybe asking some questions and really paying attention to what they're paying attention to. And suddenly you're going to matter in their world, like you've entered the bubble and now you're a character in their little play. And so what you have to say next, and maybe your request, might actually feel relevant to them instead of something that's coming out of nowhere. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is show some understanding when the request you're making isn't what they want. That doesn't mean to back off on making that request or lessening that expectation. It just means you're going to kind of empathize with the human experience of not having full control of your life and the frustration that comes from that. I think kids are often really trying to discover, like, where do they have power? Where do they have influence? And of course, they're going to want to know, they're going to find it painful, I should say, when they want to have more influence than they actually do. So oftentimes the reason behind the resistance of getting on board with a request has to do with that power struggle and that wish for more influence. So if you can find one thing that makes sense about why they may not be interested in doing this thing, rather than trying to convince them that it's great, I've done it. Oh, it's going to be so much fun. There's going to be sunshine and birds, and maybe you'll see a fish. So we can do that with toddlers for sure. But 3 and 4, they start to get a little more like side-eyed with us. They don't quite believe the enthusiasm, or if they do, they think it's just about us. It's a whole thing. So you might try get into their world and be interested in what they're already interested in, rather than trying to get them to be interested in something else. And then when you help them realize, yeah, we're actually going to need to do this other thing that you don't really like, whether it's go to the dinner table and eat this food that they're not as interested in, or, put the screen away and switch to books or whatever it might be, especially in transitions, you can get into their world and then just get a little empathy, like, oh, I know you would really love to just watch the rest of the whole season, honey. I'm thinking about like your 6 to 8-year-olds or older, like, I'd love to just sit here and watch the whole season. And if I was in charge of time and space, I would make that happen for you, sweetheart. But the reality is it's 7 p.m. and we need to be at the dinner table. And I feel for you. I know it's not always easy. Is there anything maybe we can do? Then you can shift to, is there anything we can do to make this a little less painful? Rather instead of like, let's make this fun, because it's not always going to be they're not going to get from here to here. But if you can just say like, oh, how can we make this a little less painful? Okay, so if you heard something you liked, put it in the chat. That really helps the folks who maybe are catching up to see your notes, but then also for you to like solidify things. And if you're here and haven't said hello in the comments on Facebook, always love to hear from the folks who are tuning in. Let us know where you're tuning in from and the ages of your kids. I know that Lucia is here from Scotland, or the children in your care if you're not a parent. Really good to hear from you, okay? So please do say hi in the chat. Thanks. And then also if you have a question, I can address it. And I want to make sure I pull up Lucia's question. Lucia, I believe it was something about motivation, and yeah, it was motivation and being able to support kids in adolescence with motivation. So I'm excited to support you with that. I'm just going to pull up the actual words. My interest is in raising motivation for learning in secondary school teenagers and instilling good learning habits, but I'm sure I'll find out more from the group discussions. Yes, here we are in the group discussion. So Lucia, this is a little bit of a jump from what we were just talking about, but it's actually related. So a lot of what we end up needing to do with the teenagers. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yes. So a lot of what we have to do with the teenagers is to help them get into their own world in a way that feel like, in terms of what you're asking, like what they're teaching at school and what their professional interests are. They need to trust you as a thought partner. That's like the number one thing you need to do with teenagers. You cannot come in with suggestions of how they should be thinking or what they should consider or any kind of shoulds, unless you've taken the time to get to know them enough that they believe that you get it. And that's just sort of the way we say it here in the US. I don't know if it happens in Scotland, but they're just the main complaint teenagers have that shuts down receiving advice or support from adults is you don't get it. And so I would get really curious about like, what is it that I don't get, right? You don't get it. This class has nothing to do with what I want to do. I want to write software for apps. I want to create apps. And this is just about World War II. Like, what is the point of this? And I would not argue with them. That's the other thing with teenagers. I would ask them for more about it. I'm like, yeah, like what in particular are you studying about World War II that just seems so random, really empathizing that with them. Yes, Deanna's here. Nice. Thought partner is my work in progress, right? So that you're not just providing them with well, what you could do to feel more motivated is this, that's great for 6 to, like maybe 4 to 10 at the oldest, maybe 9. But once you get into tweens, whoo, they really want it to be their idea and they want you to get it. Yes, Lucia, nice. I get it. She says, I get it. Good. Okay. So if you get it, like what they're experiencing, I would just really start there and build rapport. And sometimes I would even, if you have the opportunity, I would build rapport over 2 or 3 sessions or conversations before I would make any suggestions around, especially how to get down with the drudgery of school and classes. Because especially if you're part of the school staff or community, they're going to be like, they'll know that your agenda is to get them engaged in school, and they'll sniff that out a mile away. So if you too quickly move on to let's get you on track with, being motivated for school, you kind of in a way broke the trust of, I thought you were getting to know me and like how I feel here. So that's another thing. And then lastly, when you finally do if you have the rapport and they believe that you get it and you're clearly, have a clear picture of what the deal is, that's when you can start to do the zooming out with them. Teenagers can be like, even though they're more mature and they have stronger opinions and more life experience, they can be as kind of like time narrow-minded as toddlers, because their brains are being rewired and reorganized every single night. And they're just sort of like coming to each day, like kind of like in the moment trying to cope. And that's why they sleep and eat so much and get so grumpy so easily. So I would be thinking about helping them zoom out on a bigger picture of, well, like, okay, say you do want to be a computer science major and you want to write these apps and you'd maybe even like to land a job like in, with a company that develops apps, like what is the road to get there? And then you could have a chance to step back, like zoom back and like map it out and be like, okay, so, and then I would ask these two or three questions. So what about this is exciting? Like, is the stuff that just really gives you energy and gives you juice and like you feel like would be naturally motivating for you? It's like, well, the math class and the computer science classes and the boot camp that I would go to and the department at this particular college that I'd really like to go to, or this particular training center. Great. Okay. And then what is the sort of in the mid-level, like things that like are mildly interesting, but not that painful to do. Okay. And identify that. And it's like, and what are the things that you're just going to have to do because it's part of, what's required. It's just a requirement. You just have to do it, whether you like it or not. Get them into 3 categories. And then you can talk about how, well, this is naturally motivating at the top tier. This is like mildly motivating. And at the bottom, like that's where you actually kind of need to bring in some hacks, some like motivation hacks to be able to get some energy moving so that you can at least pass those classes or maybe even get good grades so that you can get into the college of your choice, etc. But if you start there, just going like, let's try to make this history class interesting to you. You can do that with young kids or older kids, they don't like it. They want to see it in the context of like, okay, like if I have to put up with this because there's these greater things that I get to do, I guess I'll figure it out. So that's a place to start, Lucia. Would I have these 2 to 3 sessions in a group? I would, if you haven't done this much, I always say start one-to-one. Like actually one of my coaches, Sage Levine, she's like, start with a one-on-one and really get to know, develop your process with one-on-one sessions first. And then once you see, like, you get to kind of try out a few different things and in the quickly adaptable container of one-to-one, because then you can still serve the one-to-one while you're trying things. Then when you say, oh, I've really stumbled upon like these 2 or 3 things that I think like would work in a group setting, then I would do a group and I would keep it under 6 to start, under six kids before you scale up to anything bigger, Lucia. And if you wanted to talk more about educational design, I've done quite a bit of consulting in that area. So feel free to reach out to me to chat more. Okay. Okay. Yes. And because that peer-to-peer piece is huge with adolescents, I just would want your process to be a little more streamlined before you put it to the test with a larger group of teens. Because yeah, it can fly or it can sink pretty quickly. So you might want to have some material you've tried out first. Is that helpful? Okay. All right, back to who's here. One more person, Deanna's here and had a question. She said, how do you set the foundation for setting the baseline for respectful and acceptable engagements with your kids? So this is us. I like this one because it's connected to the first one, isn't it? Yeah. But I know your kids are teens and tween, tween and a teen and a 20-year-old. So we can kind of pull these 2 together. Because even Lucia, when she creates her learning container, she's going to want to have this in mind as well, the baseline. So, I mean, it's always about scaffolding. So scaffolding is like starting from where you are and having a sense of the goal of where you want to go and making sure you're not trying to get them to go from here to here. You can always set a high standard. I'm not asking you to lower your standards, but what I want you to do is like from the bottom rung to the top rung, build in some steps along the way. So one tool that we use in the immersion, which Deanna is a part of, the Family Foundations Immersion, we have cohorts in January and July, and we just had our first retreat for the year for the January cohort and those who are continuing from last July. What we do is we use this tool like the red, yellow, and green zones of behavior, Deanna, which we haven't gotten to yet in your program, but we will, and it's in your library. So I just make a note that you can go into the library and pull out some stuff on this, or in our next session, we can do this. But the whole point is that as a family, you get together and you say, like, what is in the red zone? Like, what is it that is always not okay, right? So maybe it's using foul language towards a person, name calling, breaking things without fixing them, And red really means red, like it's a full stop, like, oh, heck no. Like this is absolutely not okay. And then you can get into what I call either the orange, like an orange zone that's kind of between red and yellow, where like there are some very exceptional times when it's okay. Like if you'd rather your kid go into their room and like smash something than like hurt their sibling or hurt themselves, like you might put that into the orange zone. So it's not a never okay, but it's like not ideal. And it's just a tiny little step up from the worst case of like what you're experiencing. But then I like to quickly move on to the yellow zone, which is these are, and I do this with the kids. I would do this with the teenager and, you know, the tweens, like setting your ground rules, like what's not okay in this space. And then yellow zone is like what's sometimes okay, depending, like in certain circumstances. Like if someone's really tired, they can skip their chores for that day, for example, or they have like a really big meet, or like you know, tournament or something. Um, like some yelling sometimes because it's like if that can be a way to kind of like blow some steam in a conflict, but then, you know, it's like yell and repair afterwards can maybe be in the yellow zone until one of your family members gets a hold of their temper, and then you would want to move that to the red zone eventually. So you can see how this sort of works. And then there's the green zone, and the green zone is like what you do want. Like, so talking things over respectfully, using calming down tools to put your lids back on, or get, you know, do something to chill out before you continue a tense conversation, you know, suggesting win-win solutions, etc. Like cleaning up after yourself, you know, as soon as possible, or like anytime you transition, like reset the space, for example, is a good one that I've seen in adolescent spaces, like reset the space, like put it back to where it was when you got it or better. So mapping the red, yellow, and green out, and I would pick like one area of life first, like how do we do conflicts? How do we, you know, manage those big emotions that come up? How do we do meal times and chores maybe? How do we do, yeah, I think it's enough, Deanna, to get you started, and we'll talk more in your next session. So fun to have clients on these calls. Yeah. And you might hear like the level of conversation I'm having is a little different because of all the work we've done already. Okay. And this is connected to Pooja, Angie, and Lucia's Lucia, your question we answered. Pooja and Angie wanted to know more about doing more around the house, I believe, and also being motivated at school. And so this is where, you know, once you get to the place where you do have rapport with your teenager and you have established that. So Pooja, Angie, if you didn't hear the beginning of this, go back to the top and listen to the first part, okay? Is that we can, sorry, just tagging them real quick. To motivate kids, definitely starting where they are. So seeing if you can like show interest in them first, always, like we mentioned earlier, share understanding of like, yeah, it's just something about this that is hard or does suck or whatever language they're using. And then I would also share your true feelings and perceptions around like why it is that this is important to you, but not until you've heard them out fully and you've really explored what, you know, heard all their complaints. Like what else, like just keep pulling. What else sucks about this? What else is hard about this? What else is annoying? And sometimes they'll say some things that are like fixable, like, well, it's the way you ask me. You're like, okay, great. Well, this is something we can work on together. Like, what's a different way that, you know, we can to help you remember that these are some responsibilities you have, right? And is there a different way that when it's my job to help remind you to, you know, take care of your chores, that is easier to hear? And you can start to get into solving problems together, working on a solution together. So the progression is get into their world, show understanding, share your true feelings and perceptions, and then work on a solution together. The other thing that teenagers are like tied to their phones. And so it's not a bad idea to create like family reminders, like family events where there's a reminder that goes out to everybody. And it can be at the end of the day. But like, hey, it's time to reset the house with teenagers. It can be that simple. And then you actually need to make appointments with them if you want them to do housework on the weekends. You cannot ask them that day and expect them to be happy about it. Teenagers are incredibly protective of their free time. So they feel to it, no matter how much you've worked on entitlement in your household, they do. They feel entitled to it. So you're going to want to make an appointment. And I know Deanna's been working on this with her kids because of she's run into that obstacle. So if you want things to happen on the weekends, make an appointment. And I would do just a little pre-gaming when they're a captive audience, like in a car ride where you're driving them from school to home or on an errand, and saying, okay, let's this thing needs to get done. Would you prefer Saturday or Sunday? Okay. Would you prefer the morning, the afternoon, or the evening? Okay, I can make that work. What do we need to do to set ourselves up for success? Do we need to pick up any supplies? Do we need to make any decisions ahead of time so that when we get to that task, we're ready to go? Teenagers actually really appreciate being involved in that planning process once you've gotten them to agree to do it in the first place. If you try to go straight into planning without their agreement, you might actually backfire. So, our teens, they're so tricky. I love them. I have a 23 and 26-year-old stepchildren, so that's why I know. Definitely raised them during that time of resistance to all things parentally suggested. Okay, Pooja, Angie, Lucia, if you heard something, let me know. Okay, and then Siggy has a similar question around cooperation, and I wish I had tagged you a little earlier, but Siggy, when you get this, let's see, when you get this tag, make sure you, let me get her. Make sure, Siggy, that you head up to the top of this training and watch the whole thing, because there's a lot about cooperation. But I am going to see what age kids you have, because maybe we can talk a little bit about youngers. Well, so you have a 12 and 14-year-old and juggling busy lives and organizing without resistance and fighting. Yeah, we've been talking quite a bit about, winning cooperation and how to help them find some more intrinsic motivation. But since there's another Jennifer, hi, good to have you here, and Jennifer Cormier, one of my dear friends and a great coach working with folks who have experienced loss. She's a beautiful grief guide. Hi, Jen, good to have you here. So while you're juggling busy schedules, cooperation, this is so hard and it's so common. I'm sure you relate. If you relate, just put yes in the chat right now, in the comments, like yes for Siggy and the questions she's asking here. So the main mindset shift I invite you to have, or to consider trying on, is that it takes time to save time. It takes time to save time. So several ways that you can save time, but it takes time first. So the trick might be looking at next week and finding 1 hour that you can set aside for this. Okay. So taking time to make time. For one of the first things that happens with kids is wanting more instruction and guidance, but not in that moment. So yeah, because in the moment there tends to be stress, and there tends to be already some power struggle possibility and some time crunch, and the busy go becomes all about come on kid, you know what to do, let's get out the door, or whatever version of that shows up. But I should say, and there's this term in positive discipline called take time out for training. If you're noticing that your kids are not either executing a skill or task well, quickly enough, or with enough focus and interest, it could be time to practice that skill or that task outside of the normal kind of rigmarole of daily life. In Montessori land, we call that whole genre practical life. And we actually have activities that kids do to practice, snapping snaps and buttoning buttons and tying shoes and stuff like that. And that's relevant, Siggy, to your 7-year-old still, how to mail a letter, and how to fold the laundry, and how to measure the soap, things like that. Definitely still in the life skills, practical life skills of day-to-day life. Now with a 12 and 14-year-old, it might be more about like the higher order types of things, like managing your time or keeping a calendar. It could be around like how to have some self-discipline around your screen time. So it gets to be a different kind of learning, but there are still skills. There's still skills, right, built in. So taking some time out to sort of strategize around like how are we going to fit all the things in that we need to fit in. So looking at the family calendar once a week with a little family meeting can really help start to develop some of that executive functioning around time management and organizing and planning and focus as well. The other thing, it involves them more. So it's less of life happening to them. It's more like they're a co-creator of your daily life. And then within those conversations, you'll notice some things that maybe are areas that you could take some time out for training to teach them. Like how to take care of the entire laundry cycle. So they're not, they can fit it in before the weekend. So then they can have more free time on the weekend, which a lot of them want. So you can see where this is going, right? I'm kind of building towards it. So that's a place I would start, Siggy. And I'm curious if you have any follow-up thoughts or questions, let me know in the comments, okay? All right, let's go to Tamara or Tamara. I'm not sure which way you pronounce your name, but I'm going to say Tamara, and then hopefully you'll let me know if I need to pronounce it another way. Thank you. How do I set healthy limits with my children who have different developmental needs? Anyone with multiples has run into this. So if you can relate, just say yes. Setting healthy limits with children who have varying needs or developmental stages, or even have different either like learning challenges, etc., can be tricky. What I can say, having run a classroom that was multi-age, and also of course like a lot of neurodiversity in the room, is that as long as you're okay with it and are really confident about why the limits are different and can really explain it, you can absolutely stand behind having differentiated limits. In other words, different limits for different kids. If there's any shadow of doubt or uncertainty, it could be like like the string that unravels the sweater, you know what I mean? So what I would want, Tamara, in your mindset shift would be around finding the value in taking the time to get really clear about why there's a difference, and finding the language that's going to really ground it for the kids so that they can see why it exists. Now, I know you have a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 14-year-old. That's really tricky. Especially with a sibling rivalry and like maintaining the boundaries. So I think with a 14-year-old, I have another client who often pops in on these Monday talks, who has a teen and also 2 younger kids, right? Like a 2 and a 5-year-old now, 5, yeah. And then a teenager, a 15-year-old. And oftentimes the 15-year-old will roll their eyes because it's like, how come the kids get this? Or how come, or even say, you're not doing it right with the kids. And it's this whole sort of gap in age that can create a lot of tension. And then the little ones can get sibling rivalry with each other because they're closer to the same age. So it's just a dynamic situation, Tamara. So I would say though, that your mindset shift is like making sure that you can articulate why the limits are different for the youngers and the older. It with such authority that it's like, this is a gray, this pen is gray, like it's just a fact. So wanting to kind of maybe inventory what your limits are, similar to the tool that I was sharing with Deanna, who's in the immersion, of like red, yellow, and green zones of behavior, and maybe making one for the teen, and one for the 4 and 1-year-old, or the 4-year-old and one for the 1-year-old, and just seeing how they're different. That, in some circumstances, such as being 1 year old, putting things in your mouth, or screaming to ask for what you want, or to show your distress, is more of a yellow zone, like we're working on it, and something that's okay for now. Whereas for the 4-year-old, maybe have a higher standard around that because they're older, and you can kind of map that out. You could sit down for about 20 minutes and map out a lot, actually get a lot done. And definitely in like a 15-minute coaching session, like I do with my clients, like we can map out a ton. I recommend you to try that, mapping it out, and what the differences are and why. Because like then for your own clarity, you can, stand with authority in the moment. I could also see you doing the 1-year-old mapping and the 4-year-old mapping with your 14-year-old, so that they can start to wrap their head around why you respond, why the ecosystem of the family responds differently to each child. That could be interesting. I wonder if you could have a little sit down and ask them for help. Like, your brothers or sisters or, siblings better is as well as I do. What do you think about this? And you maybe have done a little bit of it, but like have them come and help you with more. So that would just be writing down what is in the red zone, what's in the yellow zone, what's in the green zone across 3 kids. I like that activity, Tamara. I wonder if you could try that out and let us know how it goes, or let me know if you want more information about that tool. And the other thing I would say is, in terms of conflicts, kind of coming back to an earlier topic of like being willing to be the one who's like seeing the conflicts as maybe an opportunity. This was like from Mel's question at the very beginning. So Tamara, make sure you listen to the very beginning of being able to say like, okay, I guess I am like embrace, like I am the peacekeeper here. And I am the person who is going to need to, maybe intervene and get involved. And a thought that comes to mind is like, because I'd much rather them learn it from me than somewhere else. Although they can still learn it somewhere else, at school and with other care providers. But the fact that you have this opportunity to be the source and have some say about like what healthy conflict resolution looks like is actually kind of an opportunity. And I found myself embracing that about 6 months into my teaching career, because I was like, well, I either do this or I burn, I'm going to crash and burn, because if I don't embrace this, I'm going to have like high stress every single day, like, 3 to 20 times a day, because kids get into conflicts. It's their nature. Last thing about sibling rivalry is see if you can carve out a little bit, even if it's just 10 minutes of one-on-one time with your younger children in particular, on a more regular basis. So they do get the full, like, receiving of you and time with you, especially if you think one of them or both of them are sensitive to that quality time. That can help with rivalry. And then with your 14-year-old, it's more like 30 minutes to an hour, and a lot of listening, a lot of just asking and wondering and finding out, and maybe doing them a favor, like taking them shopping or something, right? Like taking them to a place that they want to go check out. Helping them have access to something is really exciting for 14-year-olds. Okay, hopefully that's helpful, Tamara, and everyone else listening with with some of those dynamics going on. Okay, so then I have Bronwyn Bell asking a question. How can I better support my niece who struggles with isolation? So sweet for you to consider what's happening in your sibling's life, your niece's life. So there's a lot to this isolation piece. We've all been encountering it in different ways lately, haven't we? To different degrees, depending on how many people you live with, how much quarantining there was and everything. And it sounds like you're part of the community raising her, which is lovely. But, in her case, she's living rural with 2 parents who suffer from some tough, stuff and are also very busy. So she's spending a lot of time alone, is what I'm hearing. Since you're the auntie, your reach, might be a little more limited than if you were the parent. But I wonder, as long as they're amicable to your ideas, you could definitely set up something that she can look forward to on the regular that involves other children. As an only child, not exactly isolated and rural, but, really the only kid amongst a ton of adults. I cherish the time when I got to spend like even just an hour with a cousin and look forward to it all day. It was like a big deal, so much that this cousin who's my same age as an adult is like still somebody I'm really, connected with, even though we rarely see each other, because we have those childhood memories of being only children and then being like, yes, another child. So that might be just kind of an obvious one, but it's worth mentioning because kids need kids. Like, I don't know how six with you really do. They need other kids. And I know a lot of parents who have only children worry about this. And I would say worry less and do more. Just go do, find some other good fit families that would be willing to commit to a consistent, time to connect. I've seen parents organize like mountain biking groups for their 11-year-olds, that all were single boys in those households, and they would get together and go biking once a week. It could be something simpler like, just a meetup at the park where you do a little picnic after school once a week. Or maybe something around like animal care, since I live rurally, or being in nature, right? Like going on a hike or visiting a certain like pond or body of water. And depending on the weather, it could look different in different spaces, but that would be my top suggestion. The other thing is helping her feel like really feeling into her different love languages, because kids can receive love in a lot of ways. It's not just quality time, right? It can be surrounding her with, photos and other gifts like stuffed animals and, just things that remind her of the people that love her. That can be a big part of helping kids feel connected and less isolated. Another could be around, just really affirming that she has like a place in other places, like it's your house, like really create, like having a special box of things that she gets to open every time she's there. And it just shows that you're thinking of her and connected with her, even when she's not there. Like you go out of your way to make things special for her. Like even having a little drawer with some spare clothes in it, that can go a long way in kids feeling more connected. I'm just thinking if there's anything else, it's kind of like an acts of service way of getting through. I mean, words of affirmation, honestly, it's just letting her know how you've seen her grow, and like telling her like how she used stories of when she was younger and stories that are more recent, and just noticing her growth can be really lovely and a way to feel connected to you in particular. So Bronwyn, several ideas there for you. Hope that's helpful to you. And for all of us who have kids who might be a little more isolated, share these with the grandparents or the aunties and uncles, the tios, right, in your life. Okay, and this is connected to Miriam's question, or her topic, that we turned into a question here. Miriam says, what ideas do you have for being home all the time with my children around organization and activities? Well, when quarantine was like, a lot of people were having to figure out a routine in quarantine. I said, first of all, expect to get less done yourself. Please see if there's a way you can get the same result with less time, energy, and money than usual. Like maybe you don't get to do an hour of yoga when your kid was at school, but now you can fit it in for 10 minutes and maybe put on one of the yoga for kids ones and do it together. And you still get some of your time on the mat. For example, so for you, just less is more, and fit it in anyway. Don't give up everything that keeps you sane and healthy and happy. Just maybe find the abbreviated version of those things. Same or similar result, less time or money, or maybe even effort. And then the second thing that came up a lot during quarantine, I found myself advising parents, is that if you're going to organize the day, do it around the biorhythms: wake time, the ideal wake time, ideal sleep time, and ideal meal and snack times. If you can keep that piece consistent, that can be such a great way to establish a rhythm. Because what ends up happening otherwise, it's like kitchen's always open and we're constantly grazing, or we're constantly prepping and cleaning up food. I heard this complaint a lot, especially parents of younger kids during the pandemic, which makes a lot of sense. Like, I am a short order cook, 24 hours. And since you have a 1 and 5-year-old, this might ring a bell. So I would like to, to invite you to do things like to do a bit of meal planning for the week, and maybe stock up like a snack shelf where they can go and, one in the fridge and one in the pantry. That's, reasonable for your 5-year-old at least to serve themselves. And do some batching around meals so that you're not just constantly prepping and cleaning up food. It can be tempting because you're right there, right, with the kitchen, but you don't want to spend all your hours in the kitchen. So that was one that really stood out from the pandemic. And the other that I'll share with you is kind of refreshing the activities, since you said activities. I would kind of explore what's been in storage that maybe you can dust off, like, oh, that scooter, or oh, that like board game, or all those coloring books that we haven't looked at in a while. And also do some toy rotation, like putting some things away and bringing some new things out. And if you haven't yet done any decluttering, I highly recommend doing some decluttering to create a sense of it's not an overwhelmingly stimulating experience to be at home. And putting a bunch of toys away and only taking out a handful at a time, like that really fits the space and not overcrowds the space, will also make cleanup time shorter and just less chaotic for everybody and more achievable. Like I've actually had parents put like 2/3 of the Legos away and just have a third of them out at a time, and then bring in and like kind of scoop, put a scoop away and put a new scoop in, and like that's like refreshes the Lego bin, and without having 1,000 pieces to pick up. Or get one of those, I have one in my household, like those baskets with the little tarp that you build on, and then you can go like this, and then all the pieces just go right back into the basket. And it's like kind of minimalist looking, so it's not like, too much in the environment. So I'll take a look at how the environment is supporting your sense of feeling organized and the kids being engaged in the activities. And then with 1 and 5, I would be incorporating arts and crafts at least 3 times a week. It would be really important for them to have like Play-Doh and clay time, and maybe sit outside with a painting easel, something even simple, like just like a recycling, on the ground with like some really simple brushes, one or 2 colors is enough. Arts and crafts. And then the other thing I would be bringing in is an opportunity to be outside, no matter what the weather is, and make it into an adventure, and just feed them really well before and after. Those are the blocks of time I would be looking at, especially for afternoons, crafts and outdoor time. I have seen preschool classrooms transform and kindergartens transform when they have really good rhythms and boundaries around like meals and snacks, and have access to art and outdoor activities, like the chance to run and scream and be loud and throw things, and like all the things that kids love to do with their bodies. Good. Okay, so very last one. And this is funny, I guess it's a kind of a good one to land on. It's so specific, but related to everything we've talked about today. Nan, I believe is how she pronounces her name, Nan Ho, and Denise Martin had this question: how can I get my children to do what I ask, like eat their vegetables or clean up their toys? Now, those of you who've been listening, what would you say to Nan and Denise based on what you learned today in this talk? I'd be so curious. Please write your thoughts in the comments for Nan and Denise. They'll also share. So rolling through the winning cooperation steps again, I'd get into their world. What do they like or not like about this vegetable? What do they like or not like about, cleanup time? What seems to be working? What's not working? What's their favorite part? What's their least favorite part? Like, it just get into their world. Second would be show some understanding, like, yeah, some vegetables just have that bitter flavor, don't they? And that can make your tongue can just automatically go blah. Yeah, sometimes you're so tired from playing with your toys that you just don't even want to bother putting them away. I totally get that. Sometimes I'm too tired too, and it feels like such a bummer. Or like you're afraid that your Lego creation is gonna fall apart if you move it, whatever might be going on. And then I would share my true feelings and perceptions, like, oh, but it's so important that nobody falls down. And when we have all these toys in the hallway, sweetheart, like someone could trip and fall, and that's really worrying me. That's why we do clean up, honey. And I know it's not your favorite, but how can we do this? Let's see. Maybe we can just start with finding all the blue things. Or how about you start the Legos and I'll start the, blocks kind of thing. And then this is your 5-year-old Nan who's got the veggies. So kids there's a reason why they don't like vegetables, and it's because the bitter flavor means poison in nature. I'll say it again, bitter equals poison. So if you go out and try to eat a lot of inedible plants, the main flavor you're going to get is bitter. And that's really important to honor, that kids have this palate that's keeping them alive, from, at least evolutionarily. So we have to do something about it. We have to help them with the bitter flavor by adding fats, to coat the vegetables or dip the vegetables in. So if you can find one dipping flavor that your kids like, that they can dip veggies in, that can be so helpful. Another is to put it with either high fat or actually sweet. So like I put arugula in my smoothies, and I used to put spinach in the smoothies for my daughter, and she would then take it, and my son especially, he would then drink it because it tasted more like strawberries than spinach. Baking it into breads. I've seen people even bake broccoli into brownies. There's always ways to kind of hide it in there. And then over time, you would want to build up tolerance to taking, being willing to have 2 bites of anything that you cook for them, and then have their backup meal right next to it. I say, if whenever possible, try to take the power struggle out of the mealtime. And as long as young children, especially under like 9, are willing to at least try a food, count it as a win. They may not eat the whole serving of broccoli, but if you can get them to have 2 bites of it today, count it as a win, as a place that you're going to build up from there. And I would also even have them sometimes try it while they're doing something else. So it's just sort of like not the focus of they're like staring at it and it's a trigger and they're super upset and it just triggers them again and again. Like we got our 7-year-old in our household. I had this like bonus 7-year-old in my household, and she said she didn't like mangoes, but she never tried one. So we didn't push it at the mealtime, but we were doing something else, and I put out some mango, and I was just like, yeah, like, whatever, we could try it. And I always give her permission. I'm like, and here's a napkin so you can spit it out if you don't like it, because it's not at mealtime when you can like gross out the relatives who are visiting or something by going blah, it's just like, let's just try it. Let's put it in your mouth, see what happens. And so she did. And then we were like getting up and having a dance party. And then next thing I know is I saw her grazing by and just taking a bite and taking a bite. She ate all of it. And they said, maybe mango's on the list now, huh? And she's like, yeah, I like mango, So it doesn't always take like a big battle and a throw down, but it takes your willingness to be creative and just allow them to only take a couple bites, and also to put it in with other foods that help with especially that bitter flavor. So hopefully that's helpful, Nan, and we can always follow up. Well, this was a really action-packed Ask Me Anything because we had so many great members join and so many great questions. Thank you for all of your awesome questions. And do in the comments, let everyone know who ends up watching this, which will probably be about 100 people or more. Let us know in the comments of or the chat what you learned from it. Just one thing, like your one big takeaway, or 2 or 3. If you take a moment to do that, I'll so appreciate it, and I'll come back and I'll just say hello to you. And if there's anything that you still have a question about, feel free to put the question in here. This is your opportunity to get some answers, because it's an Ask Me Anything. All right, y'all, that was our Monday Mindset. Lots of love to you all. Have a great rest of your week. So glad you decided to spend the beginning of it with us, and much more to come. And next week, let me just make sure I got this right. Yes, next week we are going to be back for your Monday Mindset Moment, these punchy little trainings I've been doing, and it's going to be about empathizing without giving in. It's such an art to strike that balance, and I'm here for it. And we'll share that with you next week, Monday at noon. Until then, be well, be resilient. You happy? Are you calm, empowered parents out there raising happy, confident, resilient kids? And we'll see you next time. Lots of love. Oh, you're so welcome, Lucia. Bye for now.